Greetings and welcome to Sunday Bible Chat for the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, which happens to be September 9th. For my starting point, I'm actually looking at a poem I wrote many years ago. It's a long poem for choral reading called Advent Pastiche, and there's a section in there which is a kind of paraphrase from Isaiah 35, our first reading for next Sunday. And so I just want to read a few lines from this paraphrase, and it begins like this. And the blind shall see, and the deaf shall hear, the mute will sing in praise, the lame shall cast aside crutches, paralytics their mats, the dead shall rise from their graves. For water flows through the desert, through the wasteland, through the scorched earth and the parched lands. The way of the river is the sacred way, the way of those born of water and spirit. The unclean may not travel by it, nor fools stray along it. Well, I share these lines because for me they evoke a sense of hope and joy and possibility, and the fact that bad news can become good news, that sterility can become fertility, that even in places of desert there can be flowers and fragrance, that even those with disabilities can overcome them. These are words of good news. Surely that's the kind of good news that we need to be hearing today. And rather than hearing good news from the institutional church, we are hearing bad news. And the reason we're hearing bad news is because the institutional church seems to be failing to listen to the times we are living in. And instead of being open to truth and open to the pain of the survivors of sexual abuse, and instead of being open to the pain of the faithful who are justly outraged, it seems that the institutional church has adopted a position of defensiveness, for want of a better word. Let me give you some examples. In the last week I've heard several prelates speak about the crisis. I've heard bishops say it did not happen in their diocese on their shift. Well, whether it happened in their diocese on their shift or not, it happened, and it's a global problem which the global church needs to address. And to say that it happened over there but not over here is to basically deny the fact that all of us have to be accountable when it comes to what has happened. We need to find the truth, and we need to see what can be done about it. So there is nobody who is exempt amongst the faithful or amongst the clergy from somehow having a vested interest in the state of the universal church. And so not in my backyard does not work. I've heard prelates say that the abuses perpetrated were done by a few bad apples. Well, it's a rather unfortunate image, I think. A few bad apples, that sounds so trivial, it sounds so childlike in some ways. But the reality is that the few bad apples were monsters in sheep's clothing, and they deceived the flock, deceived the innocent, deceived the vulnerable, and these few bad apples brought with them rot, which has basically infected and infested the institutional church and damaged the lives of countless innocents. A few bad apples. Again, I think very unfortunate wording. I've also heard prelates say that that basically similar abuses have happened in the world of entertainment and the world of sports, as if this somehow levels the playing field, and if it happened in sports and it happened in entertainment, then it's simply a society problem and not really a church problem. But this is to ignore the enormous spiritual responsibility that every priest and every bishop carries with him by virtue of ordination. For the faithful, The bishop and the priest, the cardinal and the pope all carry the weight of spiritual authority, the authority given by God, and as a group, we, the faithful, have been conditioned to venerate our clergy and to hold them on a pedestal and to hold them basically as made in the image and likeness of God. And so the shock that comes to the faithful because of the betrayals that we have experienced goes beyond what happened in athletics and what happened in entertainment. We're talking about an assault on our very spiritual values, and people are shell-shocked, and the church needs to hear this. The church needs to hear that we don't need more excuses, we don't need promises of payoffs, we don't need a promise that this isn't going to happen in the future, but we need to have a complete overhaul of the institutional church to find out where did this sexual abuse begin, and also how can we stop it, and what are the pillars on which this sexual abuse culture are built. In my reflection for Sunday Bible Talk, I look at the very early church and the influences of Greek philosophy, basically, which held the male to be superior to the female, the male to have soul while the female didn't, the idea that created matter was somehow inferior to the world of spirit, complete put down of the feminine. And so some of those values which came from Greek philosophy and which were echoed in the work of Augustine and Aquinas became the material which influenced clericalism and made it seemingly above anything that had to do with the material world. I explore that then in Sunday Bible Talk. So that's one way we can look at what has happened and look at our origins. The crisis we're facing today in the church did not happen in the 1950s, it didn't happen in 2002, it's been with us for at least a millennium. And one of the interesting things is that up until the 11th century, priests could be ordained and married at the same time, and priests had children and family life, and then basically the church forbade marriages to take place, and women who were married to clergy were declared prostitutes, whores and the like, and clergy were threatened with either dismissal or giving up their families. And so you ended up with enforced celibacy where before it had been optional. So anyway, there's a lot to listen to, a lot to ponder over, a lot to think about. Last week I spoke about the need for listening circles. I am offering 2 such circles for anyone who wants to join me. They will both be telephone circles, and the details are on Sunday Bible Talk. I'm also offering a template that other people may want to use in terms of their listening circles that they can use in their parishes or on the telephone, as I'm going to be doing, to allow the wounded faithful to share their feelings, their fears, their concerns, their outrage in a safe environment with the support and the prayerful consideration of others who are similarly shocked. I want to close with another poem that I also wrote as part of my very first book, Frost and Fire, again published in 1985, and it's a prayer to the cosmic Christ. And basically, as we think about next steps, we cannot think about next steps without somehow including the cosmic Christ in our consideration. We can do all the historical background checks of what happened in the church a millennium ago, or what happened in the church 2,000 years ago with the beginnings of Greek philosophy. We can look at all the sociological factors involved and the psychological factors as to who are the people most likely to be perpetrators, who are the most likely to be victims. But if we haven't turned this whole situation over to Jesus Christ, then perhaps we're just spinning wheels and wasting time. Before the beginning you were, and all things visible and invisible you hold in you, who are everything and within everything, especially us. We who seek our completion in yours rejoice in being held, for your arms are strong. Tenderly your torn hands caress that mystery of ours to which we are not yet reconciled. Softly you intimate that when all hidden things cease to be, so will the chains that bind us. We need to look at those hidden things and bring them to light. We need to listen to the cries of the poor, to the cries of the abused, and then we need to turn ourselves over to Jesus Christ, in whom all things are possible. And so this, my friends, is the Sunday Bible chat for Sunday, September the 9th. Almost forgot my month here. And I look forward to seeing you on a future Sunday.